Hello, everyone. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1165th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Julie Beaufils and Jessica Holmes. And now I'll introduce Julie and Jessica. Julie Beaufils was born in 1987 in Sèvres, France, and currently lives and works in Paris. She studied at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris and at the University of Southern California, Roski School of Art in Los Angeles. Recent solo exhibitions include Matthew Brown Gallery, the subject of today's conversation with Jessica, and Art Unlimited in Basel, Switzerland. And our host today, writer, editor, and critic Jessica Holmes' writing features regularly in Bomb, Hyperallergic, and of course, the Brooklyn Rail, where she also edits the Artana column and ArtSeen. Previously, she served as editor-in-chief of the arts publication Degree Critical. Jessica has contributed to numerous art catalogs, and for nearly 2 decades, she worked for the Calder Foundation, including 6 years as its deputy director. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica to get started.
Great. Thank you, Chloe. Hello to everybody out here. It's great to have you join us today. And most of all, Julie, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me and with our audience today. And first of all, congratulations on your debut exhibition in New York at Matthew Brown Gallery.
Thank you.
Um, Before we launch into that show, Slow Definition, I thought we could slowly scroll through a few slides of some of your earlier work before we transition into your more recent work. And you can maybe tell us a little bit about your artistic and background and the beginnings of your career to where you are now.
Mhm. Thank you, Jessica. So actually, I studied at École Nationale des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and it was rather a classical type of education. So I took a lot of drawing classes to start with. And I think from that point to later in my career now, I think what I've tried to do is really keep what I've learned at the École des Beaux-Arts, but try to go towards abstraction little by little. So by keeping the line, but removing elements one after the other and trying to arrive to the compositions that I'm working on today that are, I think, in between abstraction and figuration, but that try to keep this kind of economical and kind of poverty of gestures in a way.
Beautiful. And maybe you can tell us so we can sort of understand the shift. These are works that you made a couple of years ago. How do you see
Mhm.
your work moving in the last few years?
I think I tried to, I mean, from the beginning, the painting you're showing from 2018, I think I've tried to find unity in each painting a bit more than before. So try to stop fragmenting the canvas in different parts
Mhm.
and have really one movement in each canvas. That's what I try to do in the Matthew Brown show. But as you can see in the older works, there are some fragmentations. And it's because I in 2018 I've started to work on the idea of time in painting, and I think that fragmenting the canvas was a way to represent time and moments. For example, try to represent different moments in one canvas.
Mm.
So as you can see on the first work that's called The Beach, there are two parts in this canvas, and that shows two possible moments that can be seen simultaneously, but that can also show two different timings.
Mm. Maybe We can begin now with kind of a slow virtual walk through slow definition, which begins with this painting, Summer Rentals 2024. And it's a small painting, but it really anchors the first room,
Hmm.
gallery when you walk in. Perhaps you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes, actually, this painting it was inspired by a trip I took in the south of France, specifically in a city called Antibes. And the seafront of that city is very crowded with new buildings, and it's very colorful new buildings. And I found this shape of a house that I've repeated in the canvas with different types of color. And I think to me it's a way of showing kind of the fragility of these buildings facing the sea, and how even though they seem colorful and elegant, they also represent cheap rentals where people stay during vacations. And so I think that it started to show with the idea of a duality between fragility of culture in the face of nature and its immensity in a way.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I think that is a theme that carries through the show, which
Hmm.
we'll see as we go through, this duality between the natural world and man-made elements that sometimes succeed or sometimes fail. Um, I wonder if we can look at the two small works on the left and talk about these because the juxtaposition of them is really interesting, I thought. I enjoyed hearing you tell me about that when we were at the gallery together the other day.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, these two works, I decided to show them together, but are actually made on different type of frames. So the one that's called Cannonball is made on linen, and because the composition is quite organic, it's a form that's inspired by a plant. No need to see exactly which type of plant it is, it's just an idea of a plant. And so I wanted it to be on linen because I think that it's a material that brings some um, subtlety and softness to that composition. And the other one next to it, underwater, is made on wood. And I wanted to have more details in this painting. So that's why I used wood, because I really wanted the lines to be very present in that painting. And you can see that there's a shape on the lower part of the painting that's like a round, a circle. That could be some kind of star or submarine sun that you could see through the water. And so I wanted to have this really transparent effect in the painting, and that's why I decided to use wood for this one. And about the other painting, Cannonball, actually the title Cannonball is a reference to this rock band that I really like that's called The Breeders. And they have a song that's called Cannonball that I listened to since I'm 13 maybe. And I think it's a way to show that the light is actually quite powerful,
Mhm.
even though the composition is very light. And I think there's also a duality there that I find interesting. Also, it's a grunge band, and I like that the canvas is very simple.
Mhm.
It stays very raw, and so I think it's a kind of reference to that as well.
Yes. One of the things that struck me about your works on linen is the way you really allow the material to shine through, um,
Hmm.
even as you create these beautiful colors. Can you talk about the your process of working with color and the way you let the material, the background surface emerge?
Yeah, I mean, I the material is very important for me because I like to feel still the material behind the paint. So I really like the touch of the linen, and I also like the aspect of wood and the knots that you can see in the wood. And I think for me, it's a way to remind that it's an image, but it's before everything, it's a raw material. It's something very real, very there actually.
And this painting, The Salted Sea, really struck me as I was walking through the show the other day. After seeing the smaller paintings, it's sort of the first one that's a larger work. And I was really interested in the way you've used space on this canvas.
Hmm. So I think as I was telling you, I made this canvas quite quickly, rapidly, and I think I wanted to have a moment in this show where we can say something that's not completely finished, that's not really embellished. It's something, it's more about the gesture than the color, actually. And you can still see the lines of charcoals onto the canvas. And so I wanted the people to see that there was first a canvas, then a drawing, then a few gesture of painting, and that's it.
Right. And again, to go back to what you were saying with the opening painting, the summer rentals, there's a sense of like precariousness or fragility to this
Hmm.
painting.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how it emerged? I believe you told me you were thinking about some time you spent in California when you were working on this.
Yeah, I think I mean when I spent some time in California because I was studying there, and I think it was the first time that I was facing such an immense impression of space to me as a French person, as a Parisian. And so I think I realized how, as a human, there's an inner fragility, and also how the constructions that are the symbols of human existence can be really fragile,
Mm,
facing a nature that is more and more out of control. And so I think that the lines, the charcoal lines that you can see uh, in all the paintings actually are the traces of that fragility.
mm, it's lovely. And maybe here is a good moment to talk about another thing that I really enjoyed walking through the show are these isolated moments in nearly every canvas where you're almost given a chance to take a beat and pause. Is that
Hmm.
something you're conscious of when you're working?
Yeah, because I even though I was saying this one was made quite rapidly, I feel like the raw canvas in between the colors, to me, it's a moment you take to breathe.
Hmm.
So in French we say respiration, so it's a kind of respiration.
Mm.
And that's why I like to give some space to the colors, but also give some space and some time through that process.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how you make your colors? I found them so singular. They're somehow both soft and muted and also sumptuous and vibrant. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, so each color is made with natural pigment most of the time, because some are synthetic, but most of them are natural. And I try to never use white pigments.
Hmm.
And that's why each painting is very transparent. And I try to keep that transparency very visible. So the paint is very diluted.
Mhm.
And because it gets soaked inside the linen, it affects the tone. So it's never exactly the raw color of the pigment.
Right.
It's slightly darker, and it's because of the presence of the linen, as we can see in that image.
Mhm.
And I try to keep really each painting very light. I don't like when the paint is too thick, because I feel like you should be able to project yourself
Mhm.
in the canvas, and that's why I don't want too much paint to block the eye in a way. So I really try to keep the layers very, very light.
It's very distinctive, and it makes me also it really brings out the lines of your painting, which are
Mm-hmm.
significant in so many of the compositions. How do you go about defining your line?
Well, so I mean, each painting starts with the drawing, and so in this drawing, the lines really work as some kind of structure. And then when I saw the canvas, I will try to um, transcribe these lines onto the canvas with charcoal. The composition will change. Some of the lines will be removed. Some other will move somehow. And I try to find a balance between adding the colors little by little, but keeping the lines very alive and very present.
Mm.
And so it's a balance of finding the right tones, but also letting a lot of space for the the drawing to stay some kind of structure.
Since we're talking about your drawings, I thought maybe this might be a nice moment to kind of talk a little bit and dwell on your process. Chloe, if
Mm-hmm.
you could go maybe to number 27 exactly, because there's sort of here a nice progression from your drawing to the painting to a detail. Can you kind of walk us through that, Julie?
Yeah, so actually this drawing I made it at the beginning of the show, and I just wanted this composition in particular to just be about a few lines.
Mm,
I didn't want really to give any impression of perspective on this particular drawing, but just pay attention to these few lines and
mhm,
play with them. And you can also visualize different points of view with this composition. So you can either imagine something very horizontal or something that you could see from above. And so I like to confuse the points of view.
mm,
Um, so there's an impression of routes and maybe turning points in the drawings,
mhm,
but there's also the upper part, which is something that may be on the rise or about to happen, maybe a horizon about to take form. So you can imagine plenty of things, really, with just a few lines, and that's what I find really interesting in drawing, that you can tell so much with so little,
mm.
actually.
And if we look at the painting, which is, I think, the next slide, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you can really see how this it's abstracted, but how a landscape is almost emerging from here.
Mm-hmm.
Was that
Yeah,
intention?
yeah. So I think actually I had told you the story behind this canvas. Because I thought about it when I was in New Mexico and we were driving near the white sands, and because we were not from there, so we were constantly watching the GPS and the routes, and so we were in this very horizontal environment when we couldn't see anything but just a straight line on the horizon. But at the same time, because we were kind of lost, we were really focusing on the map. And I thought it was really interesting that we had this double point of views where you're seeing something from above and the horizon. Um, and so I tried to imagine a painting giving that impression.
Yes, I found that comment when you were telling me the other day really fascinating. Like the idea of you're putting your body in sort of almost two places at once, both
Exactly.
overhead and
Yeah.
horizontally. Um,
Yes, and you're trying to imagine what's gonna come next. Is it gonna be another turning road, or so you're at the same time imagining the road while you're on it, actually. And I think that was really interesting.
It sort of makes me think about the idea of when you're traveling and being in a non-place, a place you're passing
Mm-hmm.
through, or where your body maybe doesn't quite belong. Is that something that you're thinking about when you're making paintings, or when you're traveling and paintings emerge from those travels?
Yeah, I often feel like the scale of the body can change depending on the environment you're in, and especially when you're out of your zone of comfort, how like your own verticality ends up being the only reference that you have to move into this new environment. And I think that each painting, especially this size, because it's 2 meters on 2 meters, so it's taller than me. I think it affects my body when I make the paintings, because I create these strange perspectives that also confuse my eye and also change the way that I move around the paintings.
Mm.
And so I find myself visualizing a space, but at the same time, drawing another kind of space. And so that puts your body in a very interesting position, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe it's interesting to look at let's see, the one that is I'm trying to see which one. If we could go back to I think it's is it Desert Resort that hangs nearby?
Mhm.
Yes, yeah. To look at this one in comparison with Dust. It's got a sort of a similar idea, but a very different feel.
Yes, I mean, they were both made with just one color, really. So
Hmm.
I wouldn't call them monochromes because obviously that's not what they are.
Hmm.
But I really decided to only use one or two colors maximum. And so you can really see like the lines they create an image kind of in negative.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think it does give you some clues about what's going on, but it doesn't say too much at the same time. And so it's kind of up to you to reconstruct the rest in your
Hmm.
mind to complete the perspective with your imagination and try to draw kind of mentally where this is going, where the composition is going and where it's taking you. So it's a very, both are very, I would call them really like mental environments or mental places in a
Hmm.
way.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were saying a little while ago about how over the years you've been taking away things from the
Mhm.
compositions, and how it kind of tells you more when you do that.
Yeah, I think so because I think I find more freedom, especially in these two paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Where I mean that's my feeling at least that I feel free to see what I want um when I'm in front of them. And I think that gives me an impression of calm also because it's just a few lines to invite your mind to imagine a space where you feel better or you feel good or remind you of a place you've been. And so it's very neutral in a way.
And then maybe we can look at the which one is it? If you can scroll Chloe, if you can go back a little bit to yes, this one number 22, cyclic exchanges, which hangs in tandem with these other two, but has a very different feel, Julie.
Yeah, I think this one the color seems more vivid.
Hmm.
Um, and also I wanted to have one painting in the show where there is no horizontal line and see how it goes. And and so I wanted to find some kind of composition that can picture the way exchanges work in between things and people.
Hmm.
So it's something really abstract, but at the same time, there is there is a logic, I think, in the painting. There is a cyclic kind of movement that
Hmm.
attracts your eye,
Hmm.
and it can remind of a kind of cyclic time where um, nothing is before or after. There's something very present in the painting, I think. Um, and it's quite a simple idea, but I think it was important to have a simple moment in the show
Hmm.
also.
Yes, you brought up time, and we were talking a little bit about that the other day at the gallery as well, because it's something that you think about quite often as you paint.
Hmm.
Is that right? What can you tell us about your idea of like a time where the cyclical time, which this painting obviously speaks to, but so do some others in the show as well.
Yeah, I think I started to get really interested in the impression of time a few years ago. Because I've read this philosopher Bergson, and he develops this idea that um, there is a perception of time that doesn't belong to mathematics and minutes and hours, and it doesn't have to be calculated, but actually thinking is also in itself a perception of time. And I think that's an idea that you can really use in painting.
Mhm.
Because I think that painting in itself, it's another perception of time. Also, me, while I paint, I have another perception of time. Sometimes I forget what time it is, or developing one part of the painting is going to take so much time compared to another time to another element. So even me in the process, I feel like time is different. So I think that's particularly true when you're in front of a painting. There's some immediacy where you don't feel like you're on a linear kind of time, but more on some kind of perpetual now. And that's what I experience sometime in the studio, and I feel like that's what you can perceive sometimes also in painting.
And I'm guessing that this maybe ties into your idea, which I was reading about, the emotional sense of time. Is that
Yeah.
something that you still think about and as you work? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
Yeah, I think it's just a really interesting idea to count time, not with numbers, but with emotion. I think that's something really interesting. I think that comes back to what Bergson could say.
Mhm.
And because if you think about it, you cannot detail exactly how much time you spend thinking about something.
Mm.
It's a different kind of time. It's the time of the mind, and you cannot count this time. And so I think that's what the paintings are about. Because when you cannot also say I'm going to be sad for 1 hour, or I'm going to be melancholic for 2 minutes. It doesn't work like that. And I think sometimes when emotion and thoughts take over, you're in a different place. And I think that the painting give access to this place.
Mhm. Maybe we can go back because I think this ties in. If we can go back to number 42, Chloe, which is Silent Grounds. You were telling me the other day where the initial idea of this came from, which I think probably our listeners would be interested in.
Yeah, well, I call this painting silent grounds because the idea was to think about how silent it would be to sit on the ground of the ocean. It's a very simple idea, but I think nowadays it's just so rare to find silence and space in the world in general, and so that 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 that's what this painting tries to offer in a way. It's a moment where you can imagine what it would be like to be in this very, very deep place with not much light and no sounds, where the contour of everything becomes a bit, transparent.
Mhm.
And it's just an invitation to imagine what it would be like.
And I mean, I found that actually really fascinating because it's not something that I had thought of before, but the idea of, being at the bottom of the ocean, being, you know, isolated in a peaceful way from the noise of the world, it kind of puts you outside of time, which is
Hmm.
maybe what you're sort of talking about in some of these works.
Yeah, I mean, at least I try to. But yes, clearly, and that's why I tried not to give any indication of time or a specific place in the paintings so that you don't identify to a particular
Mhm.
place that you know. It's a very neutral place where maybe there's no time, and maybe that's what we need for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we can talk about this work in relation to the one it hangs sort of adjacent to the double sunrise, because I thought that was a really, it's number 38, Chloe. I thought they were sort of really in interesting combination or in conversation, these two paintings.
hmm Yeah, I mean, this one is called Double Sunrise, and it's also a very simple painting to me. Similarly to the previous one, where it's just a few colors, and it's just on the other one is one line, here's two lines. And so the two lines, they could be the two, like a double sunrise, so it could be like two suns, for example, the contour of two suns rising. Um, and it's just a way of saying that it could be weird to have two suns and maybe something went wrong at some point in the nature or the system. But it can also just be simply two beautiful colors, and that can be a very simple moment to enjoy also.
Is this the one, or was it another where you were telling me you were looking at a picture of Chernobyl and seeing something beautiful emerge from the wreckage?
Yeah, so actually it's a book um that's about people who go in Chernobyl in the city of Chernobyl nowadays. So it's not about the what happened there, it's nowadays. And some young people actually go in the Chernobyl ruins and they camp there. And in that place, nature is taken over. So now you still see the buildings, but it's mainly a forest. Um, Also, a lot of animals came back, and they were explaining that for them, going camping there is actually a way to find peacefulness.
Mhm.
And I just thought it was really beautiful that you could actually find peacefulness in that place where something so dramatic happened.
Mhm.
And I think it's a positive way of seeing things. And I think the painting is kind of about that, of seeing something positive in many natural catastrophes that are happening now, and that maybe some different times will come.
Mhm. I mean, to me, one of the most poignant things about this entire body of work was that sense of hopefulness that even out of human error or human failure, there can be something beautiful that arises.
Yeah, I think that's a common idea to many paintings. But that's also something that's we can feel sometime in the air, and right now that a lot of things are changing, but you need to see some kind of positive outcome in the
Mhm.
middle of all that.
Mhm.
And again, because painting is a way to feel out of time, it can be also a moment where you can allow yourself to be positive.
Why I think a show like this is so important now when people are feeling, you know, sometimes hopeless, often very bleak, that there's something in, the things that we can make that will propel us on and and give us hope.
Yeah, and I think that what's wonderful about just painting, I think, is in general is that it can be done with very simple things. I mean, it can be just one color that brings you joy, for example, or it doesn't have to be a fancy canvas or a fancy frame. It can be like a cheap wood frame and a cheap canvas, but you can just make something that's really joyful out of that, and And I think that's important to remember that you don't depend on any kind of technology to make something that makes you happy.
Right. And this work, Forest, which hangs in the back room, there are three paintings there that have a very kinetic energy.
Hmm.
Just to switch away from, floating at the bottom of the ocean, this one is very powerful in a different way. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, this work, it's called Forest, and well, the main idea is actually forest. And so I wanted to show how sometimes you're in the middle of, like a forest. You can see the other tree, through the tree you're next to. And so there's this kind of perspective that you feel surrounded by something that's really lively. And I think that's kind of the core of that painting, just to find yourself in the middle of something that's really um, full of life and growing. Mm.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I was really struck by this painting because when I came into that room, I almost felt like I could see it moving in the way that you
Mm.
might see, tree limbs blowing in a breeze or something like this.
Yeah, and I also wanted it to be quite abstract again, so that you don't so that it doesn't remind you something too uncanny.
Hmm.
So it's a feeling that you have, a feeling of something that's expanding and growing. And that's what I used this kind of red pink
Hmm.
pigments that's quite strong actually, that really soaked into the canvas even with just one layer. And it was just a way to show you don't need much, it can be a very simple drawing and just one layer of pigments, but it still expresses something that's about to expand very far,
Hmm.
but like something very strong.
Yeah. And maybe we can look at this one too in relation to the other large painting that hangs across from it, Suburbia Tree, which again I think will surprise the audience with it's got a very different feel than many of the others.
Yeah, well, this one is called Suburbia Tree because I wanted to develop the idea that it's a tree trying to grow in the middle of a very urban environment, but it still grows. It
Mhm.
still manages to exist and stay. And so that's why I wanted the canvas to be a little bit more complex than other paintings in the show, because I wanted it to show like the like how urban places can be so crowded and so noisy and a lot of effervescence. But at the same time, you have this tree trying to get by and being silently growing, silently there, silently standing. And I think that's quite beautiful to me when
Yeah,
I see that also in a huge city.
right. You have a painting, Suburbia Tree, hanging across from forest, and I don't know if that was conscious or not, but is nature something that you're thinking about when you're painting, or do you have a relationship with it that comes into your work?
Yeah, I think I live in the city. I live in Paris. And the nature is far. When you're in Paris, it feels like the nature is far. But I think that's because I live here and we live in tiny spaces because it's quite a small place, that I feel the need to visualize space,
Mhm.
like it can be imaginary or it can be real places, but I think that's particularly because I live in this city that I want to paint spaces and give an impression of space and imagine a fabulous nature that's all around us, even if we don't see it.
Um, Maybe we can also look at the other painting that hangs in this room. It's the small one, yes, right? It's this one, right? Line of
Hmm.
Vision, which is, you know, I hope everybody will go see this show, but they can see for themselves. It's very much smaller, and yet it holds its own with the two very large paintings in that room. Maybe you can tell us a bit about this one as well.
Yeah, so this one is quite small actually. But the shape in the middle, which shows two circles next to each other, and there's also one circle that is unfinished, that takes more space in the painting. And I think it's a way of showing that sometimes you can have a very narrow visions of things
Hmm.
when the the situation is actually much bigger than you imagine. And I think it's a way to show that there's an immensity possible. Um, but sometimes you just don't see it because your vision is just very limited
Mhm.
because of yourself.
When you're beginning a painting, how do you go about getting into it? Does every work come from a drawing? Do you sometimes just go straight to the canvas? How does it begin for you?
I think it mostly begins with a drawing,
Mhm.
but it's always something very light, and it's not final. It can move during the making of the painting, and so I think that sometimes one color would start the painting because I would think of a mood and I would think of a color that would express that mood the best.
Mhm.
And after, I will choose which other color would vibrate the best with this first color, because I think that each combination of color offers a different vibration and a different mood. And so that's why I try to orientate the general mood of the painting. Um, but I try to limit the choice of colors most of the time, because I think that the combination to vibrate has to be quite simple. Also, sometimes just like the cohabitation of two colors is just very beautiful. And because I like when things are really simple, sometimes I just limit myself to this.
And when you're working, do you pull in, whether consciously or unconsciously, outside references, like films or songs or something you're reading? How does that kind of thing play into your work, if it does at all?
Yeah, it does. Well, usually sometimes when I think about a drawing or a color, it can be like a scene I've seen in a movie or a color that I found really striking, or sometimes travel that I've made, but it's really most of the time coming from one element um, that was really important to me. And so yeah, I think that references are very present in the work. As I was saying, because I live in a city, I go see shows, I go to the library, I go to the movie theaters. I go to have a walk in nature, but that's rare. So I use everything that I see and all the references that I have around me to put into my work, actually.
In the text that accompanies the show, I was thinking especially of Red Desert, which the author mentions,
Mm-hmm.
Antonioni's film. Is that a overarching reference for this show, or is there a specific work that relates to it? Um,
You mean is the movie really important for the show? Yeah, I think so. Because there are many scenes in that movie where you can see the main character, Monica Vitti, and her son, and they walk in this really empty environment that are really industrial. But at the same time, there are some moments when it's just a desert. It's very desertic, um, and I thought quite it was quite relevant
Mhm.
nowadays to see that movie, and how sometimes you can actually wander into these really empty places where it's not nature, but it's not a city. It's not,
Mm.
it's the kind of endless suburbs, you know? And I think there are maybe more and more zones like that are not really um, defined. But I think it's still interesting to show this in between a place that's clearly a city and a place that's clean in nature. And I think now the boundaries are kind of erasing, and so I think that that in between is a very interesting place.
That makes me want to talk a little bit about the number 33, Chloe, if we could go there, the house, because
Hmm.
it's probably the most figurative, I'd say, or narrative of these works. You can almost imagine, the element, the wide element at the beginning as a house. Can you talk about this painting as it relates to sites or non-sites?
Yes, I really like the well-known side. I think it's quite true for this show. And so I mean, this painting in particular is still the same shape that's in Summer Rental. It's still this house that is kind of a ghost structure, you know, for a house, like a house as a symbol. And here, so it's a house that reflects into water, and in on the background, the lines are supposed to be trees, but it's very blurry, both zones in the canvas,
Mhm.
and so it could be anywhere really. This is kind of a non place, but you still have this house and you don't know if it's occupied or not. You don't know if it's abandoned or it's just been built. And so once again you're in this in between where you don't really know when and where you are, but you still can see that there's a house there, so there's a human presence um, that might have left or might still be there. And I just like the idea of the house as a human effort to exist in the world, you know.
Yes, it does seem to be recurring. There was the older work called The House, and then the
Hmm.
supplementals, and now this. I started sensing that theme. Is is home something that plays into any of your paintings? The idea of home, or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've never lived in a house myself. I've always lived in apartments, and I think maybe I have some kind of fascination for the house,
Mm.
as maybe like a proof of some kind of social success that you live inside the house. And so I'm quite fascinated by that form. But also, again, it can sometimes be really fragile as a shelter in a very hostile environment. For example, the shape of the house here, it was inspired by a trip I took in Marfa in Texas. And I remember being in this extremely hot environment, and you had these very small and low, very horizontal white houses. And it just seemed so fragile in such a hostile environment that's extremely hot in the desert, you know, and it is like it's very new for me to see that and wonder how can you exist and still try to create some comfort in
Mhm.
such a hostile environment, you know, and give an impression of comfort and elegance,
Mhm.
you know, with a house. And that's something that really interests me.
I love what you're saying about the idea of fragility and comfort in a harsh environment. And it reminds me of, maybe we can talk about before we have to end, Blur, which is number 35. Because I think, to me, this was one of the most emotional paintings in the
Mm-hmm.
show. And there is a sense again of something powerful meeting up with something serene. Can you talk about this painting a little bit?
Yes, I mean, so the painting was made quite quickly again. It's just one layer of indigo paint.
Mhm.
Um, but I wanted to give the impression that something's about to happen,
Mm.
and so you can see maybe some kind of storm arriving, but maybe we're also after the storm, so it's not very clear if we're before or after the phenomenon.
Mhm.
And on the foreground you can see some kind of plant, but it's also a very strange kind of plant. So it could be something that um, is about to grow or has grown already, you know. And so there's a tension in the painting. And I think the tension is because you don't really know what to expect, but at the same time, the lights gives you a feeling that it's quite reassuring. So you're in between, you know.
And if we could go back one slide, because I believe we have an image of the drawing for this one. One of the things that also intrigued me was that in the drawing, you can see a large shape that takes up most of the page, and that
Mhm.
disappears in the canvas. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because I mean it was good for the drawing to have that big shape.
Yeah.
Um, but I felt like it was maybe too much on the painting.
Hmm.
And because I wanted the focus to be on the foreground,
Hmm.
um, I didn't want to have this shape that is too much of a shape
Hmm.
actually, you
Right.
know, in the background. And so I wanted the painting to be more blurry. So
Mhm.
that's why I I removed that shape. But you know, from that drawing, actually I could make so many paintings. I could remove the plants on the foreground and just keep that big shape for another painting, you know. You can play in so many ways with just this drawing itself.
I was going to ask you, many of the drawings, it seemed like in the end, it's an element that stands out. When you're drawing, are you conscious of that, or how does your drawing process take you into the painting?
I think to come back to what we were saying at the beginning,
Mhm.
I think it's a matter of removing what's not necessary. And it's very hard actually to just to keep a few elements that say enough. And
Mhm.
I think that's what's difficult in the drawing is not to add so many elements and details, and because sometimes you can give into too much figuration, you know, too much representation. And sometimes I try to limit that and say I don't want to represent too much. I want to leave a lot of blank space or empty spaces so that you can actually find your mind wandering around in the painting.
Right. Well, that's beautiful. I think that, one thing that overall, looking across these paintings, that you've really achieved is this sense of pulling things away to leave, sparely what really counts. And I thank you for sharing this body of work with us today and talking about it with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica and Julie, for this absolutely luminous dialogue. That was such a pleasure to listen to. We have several audience questions, and I encourage those of you who have questions for Julie to submit them at the form in the chat, and I will turn to you next. Julie, the first question is from GE. GE is wondering, are your shapes and colors and lines representations of spiritual concepts or meditative concepts?
I think it can, yeah. Um, I think that sometimes like a shape would probably represent a feeling. Um, Even if I never want to impose my feelings to anyone because I think it's too much. So I try to find this really neutral way of drawing so that everyone can actually project their own feelings in the grid, kind of. But yes, there is definitely a spiritual influence in the work. Yeah.
Thank you for asking that, GE. And thank you for that answer, Julie. The next question is from Joy. Joy says, thank you so much for this talk. I wonder if you could speak a bit about the spectral halo-like space that surrounds the lines in many of these paintings. Through this sense of empty space around the lines, there's a sense of resistance and power, the line asserting itself against the larger washes of color. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question because it's very true. I usually leave just a few millimeters of raw canvas above and below the line because I think it gives a lot of light to them and it makes them really present in the painting. And that's also because sometimes just leaving a little bit of raw canvas in between two zones of color, it makes them vibrate even more rather than just having the color merging into each other on the edge. And so that's why I always leave it. Sometimes it's not even a line, it's just like a tiny space of raw canvas just to enhance the light of the color zones.
Thank you for that question, Joy, and thank you for that answer, Julie. Um, I'll ask a question next. My question is, how did you land on the square as your composition? All of the works are square in the new.
Yes, it's true. Um, well, actually, the because it's a square, to me, I don't have to think about the format. Because I don't like it's not it's not imposing itself on me.
Mm,
Because I feel like when it's a horizontal format or vertical, it's already a statement. There's already an idea,
mm.
and so. I think a square, because it's the same size on every side, it really offers me some kind of freedom. That is the same size, so I don't need to think to include it in the composition. I can just start. Yeah.
I'm going to be selfish and ask you one more question.
Okay.
I'm also curious how long they take you because I know because they're so transparent, you're not layering very much. Like once the paint's down, it's down.
Hmm.
So I'm curious, how your process works once you start painting. Is it quite slow and deliberate? Are you putting something down and sitting with it for a while, or is it quite quick and intuitive once you've finished a drawing?
Some paintings are quicker than others. So, for example, the one that's called the Salted Sea, it was made very quick.
Mhm.
But others, like for example, the suburbia tree, it took me weeks to finish that painting. Because sometimes I would start with the color, but then I would it would take me some time to think about the next move. And that's sometimes a very painful position to be in. That can take some time. And so I would say that for the large works, it can take a few weeks
Mm.
and sometimes even months because I would leave the painting at a certain state and I would come back maybe 1 month later with one color that I want to add. And I didn't know before which color would finish the painting, even though it's never really finished in a way. So it depends, but in general, the large works can take up to a month. Mhm.
Thank you for answering my questions. Magli is going to ask the last question today.
Thank you so much, Julie and Jessica. I really enjoyed learning about your process. I'm very curious when you were talking about Chernobyl and kind of like the trees coming back and nature kind of restoring itself. I was curious to know if you ever think about nature persevering through human destruction, because I feel like living in a city, that's something I think a lot about when I see like a vine or a weed that's kind of that feels out of place, but
Mm.
knowing that it's something that was built over and it's kind of coming back to.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that everything that's vegetal, like plants and fungi, I think that's the strongest thing alive on the planet. I mean, I've heard that, and so I think it's true, and it shows, and I find that so interesting to know that the things that we built on, that's actually the thing that will survive longer than us. I find that's really interesting. And so, for example, for the Chernobyl story, I just found that book. It was in a show that was organized at Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris. That was called L'Âge Atomique. It was about atomic age, and uh, and the fact that the nature is so blooming in Chernobyl today, but I don't, it's not the same nature than it was before. It probably has changed in a way, but it's still there and it's new and it has taken a different shape, different forms, you know. And I think that these new forms are actually really, really interesting. And we won't take new forms for now. I don't think so. But just to see what's possible, I think is just very, very inspiring.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you for that question, Magli. That was such a great note to end on. Thank you again to Jessica and Julie for such a luminous conversation. We are going to close today with a reading. Jessica is going to read the poem, but I want to give Julie a chance to introduce it since she chose it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I chose this poem from Nikki Giovanni called A Journey. And I think it was a really relevant poem to read today because she has a way to describe in the poem that there's a kind of journey that's actually a road that can be seen as our lives actually. And she describes herself as a passenger. And on that road, there's no guide, there's no authority, there's no indications. And it's yourself who has to be inventive enough and creative enough to build the rest of the path or the next thing that's coming up. And I think it's just really humble and very true.
Thank you, Julie. And just to add on to that, when I was reviewing and reading the poem to myself yesterday and this morning, one thing that I thought of was that you'll hear in this poem, A Journey, there are pauses and beats that seem really in sympathy with the little moments in your paintings that also give the viewer a moment to pause and breathe. So I hope
Mhm.
after this today, everybody that's listening will go see Julie's show and experience those moments of for yourself. So this is A Journey by Nikki Giovanni. It's a journey that I propose. I am not the guide, nor technical assistant. I will be your fellow passenger. Though the rail has been ridden, winter clouds cover autumn's exuberant quilt, and we must provide our own guideposts. I have heard from previous visitors the road washes out sometimes, and passengers are compelled to continue groping or turn back. I'm not afraid. I am not afraid of rough spots or lonely times. I don't fear the success of this endeavor. I am raw in a space not to be discovered, but invented. I promise you nothing. I accept your promise. Of the same, we are simply riding a wave that may carry or crash. It's a journey, and I want to go. Thank you.
Thank
Wow,
you so much. It's so beautiful.
that was really, really beautiful. Thank you so much for choosing that poem, Julie, and for reading it, Jessica. That was such a gorgeous way to conclude today. Thank you as well to Matthew and Julia at Matthew Brown Gallery, who were so supportive in preparing for today and provided a lot of those beautiful images. And thank you, Julie, for providing the others. Thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsors the NSE program and makes daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you will be able to watch this conversation shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports us, our writers, our staff, our operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free on Monday, join us for a screening of the documentary Wolfgang Leib, Here, Now, and Far Beyond. We'll be screening that on Monday while the office is closed. And as is Rail tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Take care, everyone, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Julie.
Jessica.
Thank you,
Thank
Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thanks for the
much.
reading.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Bye.
Bye.